Katabasis by R.F. Kuang. In Cambridge, during the Michaelmas term, Alice Law, a brilliant and driven postgraduate student of analytic magic, is at a precipice. Her advisor, the celebrated but ruthless Professor Jacob Grimes, has died in a gruesome lab accident, an accident for which Alice is secretly responsible. Facing the collapse of her academic career without Grimes's essential recommendation, Alice resolves to journey to hell and retrieve his soul. On the day of her departure, she is unexpectedly interrupted by Peter Murdoch, a fellow student and her academic rival. Peter, a lanky and effortlessly brilliant magician from a prestigious academic family, reveals he has been pursuing the same research. He argues that Grimes was indispensable to both their careers and insists on accompanying her. Alice, who harbors a complicated and resentful history with the infuriatingly charming Peter, reluctantly agrees after he proves he possesses crucial knowledge for the journey she lacks. Together, they complete the transportative pentagram, each sacrificing half of their remaining lifespan to cross the threshold into the Underworld. They arrive in a desolate landscape of grey fields under a dim red sky. Their first stop is the viewing pavilion, a bridge-like structure from which they can peer into a ghostly, upside-down projection of Cambridge. Here, the dead can momentarily interact with the living world. They soon find themselves in the Fields of Asphodel, a vast, monotonous plain where the souls of the recently deceased wander in a state of confused limbo. Using a temporally rooted sacrifice of port, cigarettes, and lembas bread, Peter manages to summon a clue to Grimes's whereabouts. They encounter the spectral forms of 4 undergraduates who died 30 years ago in a lab fire caused by Professor Grimes's negligence. The students, burned and disfigured, reveal that the arrogant Grimes passed through quickly, impatient to move on from the waiting fields. They point Alice at Peter toward a massive white wall, the entrance to the 8 courts of hell. Faced with an impossibly long queue of souls waiting to be processed, Alice, a former rock climber, suggests they scale the wall, which is constructed of countless layers of ancient bone. The climb is arduous, and Peter is nearly paralyzed by a sudden intense fear of heights. Alice, drawing on her past experience, calmly guides him, talking him through his panic and instructing him on proper technique. They rest at the top, sharing a moment of vulnerability and exhaustion. From this vantage point, the landscape of the courts below appears as a constantly shifting, non-Euclidean flux, a dizzying and unmappable terrain. After a difficult descent, they make camp. The harsh realities of hell, combined with their shared exhaustion, begin to break down the walls between them. Peter, attempting to brag about winning the Cook Fellowship, an award Alice had desperately wanted and believed Grimes had nominated her for, inadvertently reveals a source of Alice's recent bitterness. In retaliation, Alice flaunts the research trip to Italy she took with Grimes, a trip Peter was meant to be on. The tense exchange subsides into a fragile truce, as they acknowledge the need for mutual trust to survive. Sharing a thin hypothermia blanket against the cold, they find a moment of peace. Their journey continues into the first court, Superbia, Pride, which manifests as a vast, beautiful library. Here, souls are eternally tasked with a single assignment: define the good. They encounter the shade of philosopher G.E. Moore, who acts as a self-appointed dean, gossiping about the petty academic sins that landed his fellow residents in this court, from misrepresenting their credentials to having more of a comment, not a question, at conferences. Realizing Grimes, for all his arrogance, would not be trapped by such trivialities, Alice and Peter trick Moore using a logical paradox and escape the library. They next arrive at the banks of the Lethe, the river of forgetfulness. Its dark, churning waters, filled with the memories of countless lives, exert a dangerous pull on Alice. She is momentarily entranced, nearly succumbing to the desire for oblivion before Peter snaps her out of it. Their journey is then interrupted by the appearance of bizarre creatures made of bone and held together by magical chalk, the work of another, unknown magician in hell. They discover the creatures are repelled by the water of the Lethe. Later, camped by the shore, they make a devastating discovery. Their own chalk-based magic is useless here, as the very silt of hell absorbs it. Without their primary tool and defense, they are merely two vulnerable mortals. This realization causes Alice to break down, but Peter, with his characteristic optimism, reframes their predicament as an exciting intellectual challenge. Their shared vulnerability deepens as Alice reveals the source of her immunity to the Lethe, a permanent magical tattoo, a pentagram for perfect memory that Professor Grimes painfully inscribed on her arm during their trip to Italy. This confession prompts Peter to admit his own secret complicity in Grimes's unethical work, revealing he once stole human colons from a medical lab for an experiment. The shared confessions of their exploitation by Grimes forge a new, fragile bond between them. Their path is blocked by the Weaver Girl, a celestial deity stranded in hell after her mortal lover died and chose reincarnation over an eternity with her. She forces them into a prisoner's dilemma, a test of loyalty. If they both choose to go on together, she will grant them safe passage. If one betrays the other, the betrayer gains a powerful advantage, while the betrayed faces a terrible fate. Alice, her mind clouded by Peter's notes she discovered the night before, which seemed to contain a spell to exchange her soul for Grimes's, chooses to betray him. The Weaver Girl begins to encase a horrified Peter in silk, but they are saved by the sudden attack of a horde of bone creatures. Amid the chaos, they are rescued by Elspeth Bayes, a feisty punk rock shade sailing a ramshackle boat on the Lethe.
Elspeth, it turns out, was another of Grimes's former students, a brilliant logician who committed suicide 10 years prior. She reveals that the bone creatures are controlled by Nicomachus and Magnolia Kripke, two disgraced illusionists who, along with their young son Theophrastus, killed themselves on stage in a bid to conquer hell. Now they are ruthless tyrants of the Underworld, hunting other magicians for their blood, which they use to power their chalk magic. Elspeth also delivers a chilling revelation. Unlike in the world above, death in hell is permanent, the utter annihilation of the soul. Alice, attempting to manipulate Elspeth, schemes to steal a powerful magical artifact, the Dialathia, a true contradiction that Elspeth has found. Her plan is discovered, and an enraged Elspeth casts them off her boat into the bog of the Court of Wrath. They narrowly escape the furious grasping shades in the mire, and find themselves in the Court of Violence, a desolate landscape where the Kripkes trap them in an Escher-like pit. Trapped and facing certain death, they finally confess the full truth of their respective roles in Grimes's death. Alice admits she deliberately left a gap in the pentagram, while Peter reveals he was the one who wrote the flawed algorithm to begin with, as a petty act of revenge for Grimes stealing his research. Peter, believing his culpability is greater and that only Alice has a viable, albeit horrific, plan to resurrect Grimes, sacrifices himself using a logical paradox that frees Alice but leaves him to be captured and killed by the Kripkes. Devastated and alone, Alice wanders through the desolate courts of cruelty and tyranny. She enters the city of Dis, the domain of traitors, a beautiful but sterile imitation of a great city. There she encounters souls trapped in an endless cycle of writing and rewriting dissertations on their sins. She is led by a shade named Gertrude to the Rebel Citadel, a secluded paradise for souls who reject reincarnation and instead wait for the end of the universe. Alice discovers their peace is a horrifying stasis as they slowly transform into a silent, unthinking forest. Fleeing in terror, she is guided out of Dis by a mysterious, ancient shade named John Gradus. Driven by a desire for vengeance and a need to give Peter's sacrifice meaning, Alice prepares for a final confrontation. After killing a large magical cat, she uses its blood to power her chalk and its bones to fashion crude armor and weapons. She lures the Kripkes into a series of magical traps based on Zeno's paradoxes, managing to incapacitate Magnolia and Theophrastus. In a desperate final struggle, she uses a dark spell learned from the research of the witch Ericto to bind Nicomachus Kripke's soul to a corpse she had prepared back in Cambridge, a connection that ultimately leads to his destruction in the Lethe. Witnessing this, Magnolia takes her son and walks with him into the river, choosing oblivion. In the aftermath, Elspeth returns. Touched by Alice's fight and Peter's sacrifice, she gives Alice the Dialetheia. Elspeth has decided to abandon her quest and face judgment, hoping for reincarnation. The magical artifact allows Alice passage across the Lethe to the throne of King Yama. There, she confronts the shade of Professor Grimes, who reveals he has been manipulating her journey all along, hoping she would bring him the Dialetheia so they could rule hell together. Alice, finally seeing Grimes for the petty, cruel man he is, rejects him. Using Peter's exchange spell, she offers Grimes's soul to King Yama in return for Peter's. The bargain is struck. Peter is resurrected, his soul pulled back from the brink of annihilation. King Yama, amused by their audacity, also restores half of the lifespan they had sacrificed. He grants them passage back to the living world. They ascend a magical staircase that leads them out of hell and into a moonlit garden in Cambridge. Hand in hand, exhausted but together, Alice and Peter step back into the world, forever changed by their journey through the Underworld.